Today, we have a great speaker, Matt Wakefield from EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute. So Matt is going to share with us top cybersecurity challenges in grid environments and research questions that need to be answered in this domain. So Matt has over 30 years of energy industry experience. He is currently leading a team to modernize grid environment through the applications of ICT cybersecurity and research programs. Matt is a facilitator for the EPRI ICCS Executive Committee. Prior to joining EPRI, he was a manager of applied technology for applying emerging technologies in energy markets, and also a nuclear reactor operator in the US Navy Submarine Fleet. He received his BS degree in technology management from the University of Maryland University College. So Matt, thanks for joining us this week. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Amin. I really appreciate it. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Halloween. So today I don't have a very creative costume. I guess I'm full EPRI. I'm an EPRI researcher is my Halloween costume for today. Thank you for the opportunity to present here. So I wanted to share with you some perspectives on cybersecurity priorities from an executive perspective. This may not be something that you normally hear about at an engineer or manager level, but one of the things I work with many utility chief information officers and chief security officers, and making sure our R&D at EPRI is aligned with the needs of executives as well as the tactical needs. And we just completed a series of interviews and discussions following some work that we've done. And so I'm going to share some high-level perspectives on those priorities. First, let me start off with just providing a little bit background about EPRI. If you're not familiar with EPRI, our mission is to advance safe, reliable, affordable, and environmentally responsible electricity for society through global collaboration, and I'll talk a little bit about collaboration in a minute, thought leadership, science, and technology innovation. The three key aspects of EPRI that we like to convey are, one, we're independent. We're a nonprofit. We're objective, neutral. We do scientifically based results to address reliability, efficiency, and so on of the grid. We are not a policy-making organization. We do not advocate for policy. It's just scientific research that may inform technical decisions. It may also inform policy. We're also a nonprofit, so we're a 501c3 chartered to serve the public benefit, and we're collaborative. And the collaborative aspect, prior to joining EPRI, I worked at an electric utility, and coming to EPRI has been a great experience where the electric utility industry is a very collaborative environment. And typically, electric utilities don't compete with one another, and they all have a common mission. And so it's a really great environment to work together, where we identify research issues that will benefit a large number of utilities. We pool resources. It really works in increasing the efficiency of the work that we can do that really no single utility can do on their own. And that's really how we were formed. In the late 60s, there were some major blackouts, and the industry came together and said, hey, we really need to work together to address these issues. That was the formation of EPRI. Now, utilities don't have to participate in EPRI. They choose to participate based on the value we provide. But we do have a large participation with most of the utilities in the United States and growing internationally as well. This is a one-slide overview, very high level. I think we have over 70 or 80 research programs within EPRI. This shows kind of the examples of the breadth of the work that we do in the energy and environment space, generation, nuclear generation, and power delivery and utilization. Now, I'm down here on the bottom right, this information communication and cybersecurity. A lot of this work, the programs that I manage support that data integration, the cybersecurity, telecommunications, or power delivery, but I also have a responsibility of cybersecurity that cuts across nuclear and generation as well. So that's a high-level overview of EPRI. And if anybody has questions as I go through this, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to monitor them, or unmute yourself, and I'll try to answer those questions. Because I'm going to probably cover.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
And I said I will monitor them and I'll let you know.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. So that's a high-level overview of EPRI. So one of the things that we make sure that we try to do with our members is get feedback on our research. As I'd mentioned, utilities and our members can choose to not participate or choose to participate. So we have a very formal advisory structure that makes sure that the research that we do is aligned with the needs of utilities at the subject matter expert level, down at the engineering level, the manager director level, and the executive level. And a big important thing that we want to make sure is the work that we do and the research that we do can be applied to utilities, and it adds value. Now, it is research, so everything that we do doesn't necessarily automatically become valuable. You know, there's hits and misses there, but we are very much focused on applied technology. So, and in generalization, the Department of Energy, the national labs, maybe universities like ourselves, maybe focused a little more on basic research, and we're heavily focused on applied research. Of course, there's overlap in that as well. And a lot of success for us is when utilities adopt our technologies and apply it, or commercializers, vendors, product manufacturers adopt our technology and implement it within their solutions. So we did a series of interviews and discussions with executives on cybersecurity priorities, and many topics came up. But when we took a step back and looked at what are those priorities, you know, there's 5 things that kind of surface to the top, and I want to talk on each of these briefly. One, automating cybersecurity capabilities. There is just a lot of events occurring, and it's very difficult for humans to monitor and track all those types of cybersecurity events. Supply chain risks. I'll talk a little bit about some of that. There's a recent executive order on supply chain and understanding risks of not only when you're procuring and acquiring equipment, but also once it's installed, are there supply chain risks? Another thing is related to risk, quantifiable data to support a risk model and decision making. One of the things that we specifically focus on is what we call OT, operational technology. This is different than the traditional IT, information technology space in a utility, or other organizations. The IT space may be your business systems, like your financial systems, your human resources, your legal systems, your some of your customer systems and things like that. On the operational side, it's less mature in some of the cybersecurity technologies to be able to have the data you need. In the IT space, there's a lot more standards and maturity in that space. So we'll talk a little bit about how do we get quantifiable data. Cloud security is a growing area as well. Cloud security, use of the cloud in the IT space is pretty mature. We've got the big players. You've got Amazon, you've got Azure, Microsoft, Google, and so on. A lot of big players out there. And there's a lot of benefits to using the cloud. Scalability, the ability to deploy something quickly, the management aspects. But when you look at using the cloud for the grid, for what we call real-time systems that are controlling assets, controlling the grid, there's a lot of risks out there. However, we are seeing with the maturity of the cloud, there's actually a fairly renewed interest in exploring, okay, so how can we take baby steps to start using the cloud for things that we traditionally wouldn't consider that? What are the risks associated with it? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the last thing is cybersecurity for distributed energy resources. So we'll talk about what that means, but as we look at the deployment and the increasing deployment of solar, of electric vehicles, of energy storage, smart appliances, they can add a lot of benefit to the grid with the flexibility. They can if they're consuming energy, we can control them to turn them off to save at critical times, or if they're producing energy like solar, and we want to be able to manage that. There's a lot of benefits, but as you can imagine, if you've got a growing amount of controllable load and resources on the grid, that's a pretty significant risk if it was hacked. So we'll talk about that. So talking about automating cybersecurity capabilities, this is a very broad area. One of the things we did, we asked, when we look at, I don't know if you're familiar with the ESC2M2, which is the electricity subsector coordinating capability maturity model, ESC2M2. There's a maturity model that has capabilities, cybersecurity capabilities in it. And we asked executives, there's actually a total of 10, I only showing the top 3 here that they responded to. What are your priorities in regards to capabilities over the next 12 months? And the top 3 are shown here: threat and vulnerability management, event and incident response, asset change and configuration management. And when we dug into this a little further, there was an automation piece in all of these things that would help them. As I said, events are occurring faster than humans can respond, and there's a growing need for automation. And you can see some of the quotes here. Visibility is king. Anything that helps or enhances the ability to see things in the operational space as they're occurring is beneficial. The volume of data is increasing, and the ability to assess and evaluate those patterns will be important. So speaking to the volume, okay, so if you can think about how the grid is laid out, you've got generators, you've got a transmission system that goes out to various regions, and then when you get to the distribution system, which distributes the energy to customers, the residential, commercial, industrial, we're seeing a growth of data on that distribution side with more sensors being deployed, more technology being deployed to distribute energy resources. And as you get more digital equipment out there, the amount of data coming in is just tremendous. It is really exploding in scale as we go out there. Another quote: we spend a lot of time evaluating logs and information and events to determine if those events are actually incidents. So a lot of our efforts are around automating that it's just not practical for humans to do that. And another thing, automated asset discovery. So this gets to asset and change configuration management. There may be various parts of a utility organization that is deploying equipment, and they may not be completely coordinated with the cybersecurity group. And it's important to have means of detecting what equipment is on the grid that you may not be aware of. So having means to automatically identify those assets, including configuration and change management, is really an important aspect of cybersecurity. It can take a tremendous amount of effort. So efforts to improve that are really important. And I mentioned the difference between IT and OT, so information technology and operational technology. That aspect of an IT infrastructure is fairly mature. There's a lot of standards in place to do that. But on digital equipment for the grid, it comes from all different types of environments, may not have, in many cases, has not implemented those same standards for tracking from a cybersecurity perspective. So why is that important? I've just got a few examples here. There is this first, and by the way, in the presentation that I believe this was shared, each of these has a hyperlink to it. If you mouse over the graphic, it'll take you to the hyperlink. But back in 2013, which was, seems like a long time ago, and it was fairly long ago, this was one of the things that opened utilities' eyes in regards to having the data to be able to detect an event. So this is at a Metcalf substation in California. And the timeline here depicts various things that happened over a period of several hours. One, attackers cut telephone lines at 12:58 a.m. At 1:31, they used high-powered rifles and actually fired on and shot at the substation transformers. There were some alarms and things that came in from physical security associated with that. There, at 1:41, there was a call from a power plant operator to 911 saying, hey, something unusual is going on. At 1:45, operations groups gets information that transformers are starting to crash. At 1:50, the attack ends. 1:51, police arrive, and at 3:15, a utility electrician arrives. So that's a fairly long time for a response for that type of event. And one of the things from the industry perspective, and EPRI's been doing a lot of around the space, is developing a framework to integrate data from multiple sources to be able to correlate that data to detect an attack that otherwise may be difficult to attack. They had multiple sources of information. They knew they caught the telecommunications went down. That went to the telecom and network operators. They had physical security alarms. That went to a different group in physical security. There was a power plant operator in operations had some indication and called the police. There was another group that had information that data from transformers were overheating and so on. So the ability, and all of that, those events really happened near the same time. So being able to correlate that information is a fairly significant effort among the industry in development, with most large utilities have now have some form of integrated security operations center and building in additional practices to improve that data collection and correlation of events. Cyber threat and vulnerability analysis. This middle paper is one of many that identifies the threat from foreign adversaries, and that's real. These are real threats. We see them frequently. And this third reference came out in August about just a Russian malware attack and information on that. And these types of notices and events come out frequently, but it's a very dynamic environment, and being aware of all these attacks and events may not necessarily be an attack, but being able to filter through that and determine that is really challenging. Some of the things that we're doing at EPRI related to this, we've got, I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, by the way, and this is where our primary cybersecurity research lab is here. And all this equipment here is just down the hall from me. I've got lab, that's about the only part of EPRI that is in the office nowadays is our lab work with the COVID situation. But we've got an integrated security operations center where we deploy equipment in here. We test these attack scenarios, provide automation and playbooks that we provide to our utility vendors that we can prove out in that environment. We've got a smart grid substation lab. And in this, we can mimic and create a virtually, I won't say any substation environment, but most utility substation environment, and mimic that in a safe environment to evaluate equipment, test it in a sandbox that allows us to see how that equipment performs against cybersecurity events, do simulated attacks, and see how well that equipment responds to that. We bring in a lot of vendors in here as well to look at various use cases and attack scenarios and see how their equipment responds to that, and look for intrusion detection or intrusion protection. And one of the things we do with vendors in this case is, we don't want to just poke holes in where they've got a flaw, but we want them to be successful because that helps protect the grid. So we work with them as well to say, here's some things that you need to do to protect against these types of attacks. And then DER, distributed energy resources and demand response. We've got a lot of equipment, electric vehicles, smart inverters, energy storage, even drones, various equipment in here that we evaluate for security, various architectures, practices, and so on.
Matt, I have a question for you.
Yes.
The energy industry, because of its nature, includes a significant number of legacy software. At least this is actually what I can imagine how the architecture should look like. So as you discussed, patch management seems to be a viable approach. And so in order to do that, first you need to know how to generate patch or apply patches to the software. The second step is how to guarantee that the patch that you are applying on those devices do not disrupt the current system, right? Or the current operation or cause damage. So how do you test this? How do you do that in your patch management framework? Or any thought what kind of challenges there are in that domain?
That is a fantastic question, and it is a huge challenge because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of legacy equipment deployed in here. The patch Tuesdays, that doesn't happen in the OT environment. It just cannot happen. There's a risk management approach that goes along with that to understand, when we identify an issue, a notification, a various piece of equipment that has a vulnerability, a lot of utilities will assess that and see what kind of risk assessment that has and put a plan in place based on that risk, whether or not to do that patch. If it's a high risk, obviously they'll be more proactive to doing that. Low risk, they may wait until a maintenance period. Some equipment is more advanced where there is patch management capabilities built in and being able to test that out. But it is a significant challenge. It's a significant research question, and I mentioned here an asset change and configuration management. That patch management challenge is a topic that comes into that. And not only do you have the legacy equipment just in general as an issue with older equipment and is installed for years, but the diversity of equipment from one utility to the next is fairly significant as well. So creating a solution that may work for one utility or a set of equipment doesn't mean it necessarily will work for another utility. So I don't have the exact answer for you, but just to acknowledge that this is a challenge and a priority.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. I'll just mention, just another area that's recently been highlighted of a need and interest is this insider threat management. Most utilities have a traditional insider threat management program. Most organizations do, large organizations anyway, to detect potential behaviors and things that may pose a risk, and looking at people's behaviors and things that they're doing. But there is a gap in specific areas in the operation of the grid perspective. And so we're stepping up some research and things in this particular area and making sure that we have utilities have the data they need to track that. So for example, just some simple examples on insider threat, things that you may be looking at is, is somebody badging into a substation outside of normal working hours? And does that person, if it is within normal working hours, are they assigned to a specific work order that on project that was planned to do? Do they have access to, should they have access to that piece of equipment, and correlating that information and looking at various data that can help identify behavior that's not expected to be normal. And some other things along that is developing risk personas. So we're doing a series of interviews with utilities based on the role that they have and whether they're a grid operator managing the transmission operation portion of the system, if they're a substation engineer, if they're whatever their role may be. And based on the role that they have and the potential risk if they decided to take malicious action, what are things from a behavior perspective you need to consider in that? Insider threat is a growing risk, and it's very, very challenging to detect, and the risk is extremely high. You know, if you just do a search on insider threat examples, it's if someone wants to be malicious. There was just as an example, an employee that had network management responsibilities, not in the energy industry, but finds out he's getting fired. So he steals all the passwords or hides them away and disables, I don't remember exactly what he did, but basically made their IT infrastructure unusable because nobody had administrative rights to the equipment any longer. If someone has access to a lot of high, very important equipment, the risk there is pretty high. So we've got several other topics to go on, so I'll just pause there. Any questions on automating threat mitigations and things of that nature? All right. Supply chain risk for procurement and installed equipment. So there is a number of things going on associated with this. There was, in May, there was an executive order on securing the United States bulk power system. This executive order came out and identified foreign adversaries that pose a risk in the supply chain to the bulk power system. And they basically have said, if you're looking at suppliers, I might not get the list exactly right, but it was China, Russia, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. I think that's it. Those companies that you're no longer allowed to purchase equipment from those countries. And there's not a lot of equipment being purchased from those countries. And then there was a lot of vagueness came with this executive order as well. It's like, well, we're going to develop a task force, and they came out with a request for information and trying to get input on what are current utility practices and so on. But it raised the visibility, yet again, on the risks of foreign adversaries. Later that month, I've got this article, U.S. seizure of Chinese-built transformer raises specter of closer scrutiny. So later in May, the U.S. seized a Chinese transformer that was going to WAPA, was the Western Area Power Administration, and seized it from going to WAPA and took it to Sandia National Labs for evaluation. Why it was seized, what vulnerabilities have been discovered, have not been disclosed. However, there have been articles published conveying that there's concerns that some of the digital equipment on this transformer was counterfeit. So for example, if you think, so these transformers that typically go on transmission level transformers are huge, multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment, very complex. Lots of digital equipment goes on them, from relay protection, monitoring dissolved gas, temperature monitoring, monitoring the health, as well as controlling things like load tap changers. And there was one report had speculated that there was a counterfeit load tap changer on this transformer. It hasn't been confirmed. It may have been looked like it came from a U.S.-based company that the transformer manufacturer put on there, but then speculation that it was actually a Chinese counterfeit piece of equipment. So that's an example of a supply chain risk. And in fact, we've got in our lab here in Knoxville an example of a pressure transmitter from a very reputable company in Japan, and we were able to purchase off eBay the exact same transmitter, exact same model number, looks very similar, turned out to be a Chinese counterfeit. And so we did an evaluation on that, and that was about a year ago. But this is a real risk. These various supply chain risks are difficult to detect and sophisticated. So another opportunity to collaborate in the supply chain space. One of the things that we've developed and are doing is in this space is we've got a a method called the technical assessment methodology that was developed out of our cybersecurity program. That is a systems engineering approach that identifies vulnerabilities of a product, or it could be a system, identifies mitigations. What mitigations do you need to put in place for those vulnerabilities? And that outcome of that is what we call a reference cybersecurity data sheet. And so that's before it's installed and how it's configured. And that's an opportunity to share that to help with industry. The third step in this process is to develop what we call a tailored cybersecurity data sheet that looks at, okay, now you've got it installed. What are mitigations that you need to put in place to further mitigate those vulnerabilities? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This can be applied at procurement, design commissioning, or install configuration. In this, there's a link to a video if you want to watch a short video that provides an overview of that. So as an example for procurement, we are working in our nuclear sector. This is much more mature. So we have a lot more nuclear manufacturers that produce digital equipment producing these reference cybersecurity data sheets. It's relatively new in the generation and transmission and distribution space, but we did, to help the industry along, we've created some. Here's one for a Schweitzer 487E protective relay cybersecurity data sheet. And what this does is goes through, okay, based on the out-of-box purchase, what are vulnerabilities, what are potential mitigations you need to think about before it's installed. Just a simple example of this is, by default, there's a jumper that enables or disables passwords on the front touchscreen. And by default, that jumper does not require passwords. And so you need to know that. You may not know that going into it. And this provides a systematic approach to document that. And then when you look at implementing it, you're going to, most likely, you want to put that jumper that requires a password and implement other mitigations and things along those lines. Another example, looking at legacy and installed equipment. We go through this TAM step 1 and 2 to identify vulnerabilities and mitigations. And I'm going to talk just very high level about that transformer example. We are looking at, with a couple of utilities, AEP and Dominion, to evaluate their common transformer digital equipment packages. These are not Chinese-made transformers, but it's similar type of equipment. So we're looking at the digital equipment on these transformers, typically 4 or 5 pieces of digital equipment, and we're producing reference cybersecurity data sheets, something that can be shared. And the third step is looking at, okay, now how is that equipment installed and configured for AEP's standard configuration and Dominion's standard configuration, and what types of additional mitigations do they need to put in place that are tailored for their unique situation. And then now you start looking into, okay, those jumper settings. Do you have ports that are exposed that are enabled? Can you disable ports that are not being used? Physical security. If you have equipment in a cabinet, lock that cabinet. Do you have a process to manage who has access to that lock? Physical access to the whole substation. Do you have card reader access? And so basically you go through a process because you're going to have things that are not being able to mitigated in step 1 and 2, but looking at various relationships and other practices in this third step helps you understand how you can protect that equipment. Now, when you look at, I'll just pick AEP as an example. We put their most common transformer configuration. We do this once, and now it's relevant to close to 1,000 substations of theirs. And they will know, they will either have confidence that they have the right mitigations in place and the tracking to do that, or if they find a vulnerability that they need to put additional practices in place, they now have that information and can take those actions. Any questions on the supply chain topic?
Matt, are they previously known vulnerabilities, or your team were able to find unknown vulnerabilities as well?
We are, in this particular case, we are in the process of doing that with AEP and Dominion. So we are, we don't have all the answers yet. So we're actually curious to see, how well protected they were to begin with, and what practices they have in place. This is potentially a high vulnerability asset. We think practices in these typically pretty good scrutiny at the transmission level, but this rigor is important just to validate that.
All right, thank you.
All right, the next topic, quantifiable data to support a risk model and decision making. So this is another challenge in the operational space. And it relates to the kind of, like I talked about earlier, the IT-OT difference. The IT space is more mature. There's more mature on standards, on collecting information in the IT environment, on understanding risks and vulnerabilities. But in the operational space, just for all the reasons we talked about, it's not as mature. And you can see here the cost of OT security investments is clear. And there's a lot of pressures to manage costs, but it's difficult to quantify how those investments are buying down risk and aligning that. And they need that data to back those investment decisions. So I've got a link here to a couple of papers. One, this is a short overview of EPRI's approach on OT security metrics. And this approach here is we're working with utilities to help them collect the data they need to do cybersecurity metrics in the OT environment. And I'll talk about why that's different here in a minute on the next slide. And this other USA and NARUC report talks about the prudency of cybersecurity investments, the challenges associated with that, various approaches, but it also calls out the EPRI metrics within that. So it's an interesting read, just kind of get a state of the industry on where we're at in that particular space. So where do the metrics fit in this? There's, in the top left, cybersecurity frameworks, fairly mature. The NIST cybersecurity framework, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, those types of things is well known, very mature, and utilities, many organizations use that framework. In the top right, requirements. What are cybersecurity requirements? Some requirements are mandatory, some are discretionary. In the electric utility industry, at the transmission or bulk power system, there's requirements called NERC-CIP, critical infrastructure protection, cybersecurity requirements that are mandatory if the assets are of a certain size. And then there's a whole number of resources that provide cybersecurity requirements that are good practices, but that are discretionary, but good practices. In the bottom left, the ESC2M2, the electricity subsector capability maturity model, measures the maturity of a cybersecurity program. So it's like, what practices do you have in place? What level of maturity are you in those practices? But it doesn't provide a feedback look to validate that and understand if your maturity is going up and down. The EPRI cybersecurity metrics is quantifiable data that measures the effectiveness of the cybersecurity program, how well you're protected against attacks, how well you're identifying attacks and events, and how well you're responding to those events. So right now we're working on an approach with utilities that we've been working on for years to implement tools and processes that allow us to do this. The biggest challenges here are getting the data from all the different OT systems. So we're doing pilots right now with utilities to understand what data do we need from various vendors. We're working with vendors to get this into our software, to do the analysis, and help them get visibility. And our vision is to have real-time data streams that show, it could be on a daily basis, where are your metrics trending over time? If you put a practice in place, does that improve your security posture? Is something happening to damage your security posture? And various dashboards and tools. It's a pretty heavy lift, but it's a really big gap in the industry that we're trying to work on. So there's still a fair amount of work here, but we think it's really important for the industry. And this was identified as an important area from a utility executive perspective. Questions on that? All right, 2 more topics. The cloud security for real-time systems. What are potential opportunities? So we look at various cloud architectures, and I don't know, some of you may be very familiar with this. I put this in here just in case some of you aren't. But there's various models of cloud architectures. On-premise, physically at the utility site or organization site, a hybrid or a fully public version. So in the operational space, when you're talking about controlling operation of the grid, controlling equipment, data from the grid, in most cases, those are on-premise. There's high risk if those systems were compromised that it could impact the reliability of the grid. The benefit, you've got that full control, you've got that full oversight of security, but it does also mean you need to have the expertise on site, on your organization to manage that, and be able to make sure that that system's available 24/7. The 2 kind of hybrid modes are infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. These are beneficial because they leverage the benefits of the cloud. You start moving some of the hardware off-site. You don't have to deal with that. The networking, the virtualization, the operating systems, all that management can be managed by a cloud provider. But it does blur the responsibility. Who's responsible for cybersecurity in these various situations here? But we are seeing the level of maturity in this cloud space is fairly significant, and to the point where the expertise for these companies that do cloud hosting as a service, it's so critical to their business. They are the world-class experts in managing these, including cybersecurity. The full software as a service on the far right, much less maintenance, less overhead, but you do relinquish control and oversight and security. And when you look across the board at utilities who are doing various implementations like this, we tend to see the larger utilities be more to the left of this. They've got larger organizations, more expertise, more risk, and tend to be shifted to the left and go that route. When we look at very small organizations, the municipals, the cooperatives, some may have as few as 1,000 customers, for example, or just a small tens of thousands of customers versus millions of customers. They really don't have the expertise in-house to manage the software and the cloud and the infrastructure. So across the board, there are a variety of these in the utility infrastructure in these environments. So some of the feedback that we've got, we are seeing a more deliberate shift in formalizing cloud resources within utilities. This was just some polling we did last month. Question: my organization has a cloud center of excellence or cloud transformation team. 55% said yes, 45% no. Relatively small sampling, but nonetheless, that is just from a year. I don't know if we have data from a year ago, but that's a deliberate shift to see that formalization of those roles within an organization. And from a cybersecurity perspective, along with that cloud transformation team or cloud center of excellence, we're seeing those teams are having a more formal, dedicated personnel to address cybersecurity. It's really important. And one of the challenges with the cloud is what we call shadow IT. It is real easy for anybody in an organization to take their credit card and get some cloud services with Amazon and AWS, and automatically now they've got the capability of doing that. And it wasn't that long ago, and it still occurs to some degree today, probably in some organizations, that can happen. This is just, I'm being cognizant of time here, when we look at some of the grid applications, AMI's advanced metering systems, this is getting all your data from your meeting, which is really the utility's cash register, you know, the billing data. How many of them are looking at moving that to the cloud? 27% said full stream ahead. So advanced metering is fairly mature. It's been around for decades, and those metering providers provide those services on behalf of utilities. So that's one that has a little more maturity. Full steam ahead utilities are doing that. Some are proceeding with caution. About half are interested in exploring that, preliminary investigation, and 13%, you know, not considering it. That'll all be in-house. And you can see the variation as we go through here. SCADA is acronym for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. So this is getting all that data and doing the control of substations and remote equipment. You'll see in these bottom three, there is no blue bars in any of these, which is the blue is the full steam ahead. No utility that we surveyed is considering moving any of those systems to the cloud at the full steam ahead perspective. Some are exploring it though, proceeding with caution or interested in doing some preliminary investigation. But you can see here, a large number of them are saying, nope, that is not a consideration for us. So what are we doing at EPRI related to this, the cloud security reference architecture? So what we're doing to help utilities, so we're a collaborative organization, and an example project that we have is working with utilities to identify cloud applications that they might be considering moving to the cloud in the next 12 months. And then we're helping them do a risk analysis, creating an architectural profile for that, what tools and guidance that need to be put in place. If it falls under mandatory compliance requirements, what are those compliance requirements and what do they need to put in place? And we're going to produce a reference cybersecurity architecture for that utility application. And then from a collaboration standpoint, so we'll do that one-off with each utility, but the non-proprietary, the results of that, we'll share with all the members of the project so they get some visibility on how other utilities are doing that and can learn from others. One more topic, and I'm cognizant of the time. This is, I said cloud security. This is distributed energy resources. Cybersecurity for distributed energy resources, you know, just a couple of articles listed here that a growing challenge of this first one, twin threats. Distributed energy resources is growing on the grid and cyber warfare threatens the stability if those were compromised. And so what is a distributed energy resource? On the right, I have that there. It's basically any controllable resource that consumes or produces energy. It could be electric vehicle, where a customer may sign up to say, for a payment from a utility, I'll allow the utility to determine when I'm charging or not charging my vehicle. Usually night is not a problem, but if they're charging during the day, turn it off during peak periods. Solar storage, other controllable appliances. This is pretty complex because in many cases, there are numerous stakeholders. There's the customers that own the asset, that may own the asset. There could be a third-party aggregate that's managing that on top or on behalf of the utility, or it could be utility owned as well. Who's responsible for cybersecurity in these complex environments? And we find in many cases, cybersecurity is an afterthought, and when a business is deploying a technology, they may not be fully aware of the cybersecurity risks. So these are three areas of work that we're doing in DER security. Cybersecurity for distributed energy resource and integration and management. This is dealing with those third parties or multi-party systems. The actual technologies, the DER technologies, these tend to be more the solar and the storage. What are tools and guidelines from a security perspective. And when you look at scaled out, but also down at the component level. And the last one is demand response. These tend to be more like the controllable appliances or things where you want to automate and turn on or turn off an appliance or air conditioning or a pool pump. What are cybersecurity practices we need for that? And I went through that last part pretty quick, so if there's any questions about any of these topics, I will take them now.
Thanks, Matt, for the wonderful talk.